I'm Tina Fallon. I am a real estate agent with Realty Collective, a boutique real estate firm that was started 19 years ago. I have been with Realty Collective for 18 of those 19 years. And one of the reasons is because Realty Collective was founded to defy the stereotypes associated with New York City real estate. So we're basically your coach, your therapist, your sounding board, and we help you through the emotional roller coaster of selling in New York City. We try to make it as low stress as possible. There's no way to remove the stress from this process, but we try to take care of you as you go through what is one of the biggest changes you'll experience in your life. So one of the ways we do that is by introducing you to other real estate professionals who can help you along the way, including real estate attorneys. And so I'll turn it over to Jacqueline for an intro.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Jackie Newmark. I am a real estate attorney. I only practice transactional buying, selling, representing lenders, so I'm familiar with every aspect of the transaction. I have been practicing real estate law for 20 something years now, and I'm here for every step of the way from questions even before you have an accepted offer, closing costs, what to expect in the process, walking you through the contract and all of the due diligence materials, coming to the closing, and even after. And as Tina said, also a therapist too. It's a very emotional process, buying and selling, but particularly selling. So I give my cell phone out to everybody, and you can call me whenever you need anything, text, email. I know that there's a ton of questions, especially in the beginning phase. So I'm happy to answer any questions whenever they come up.
I think that introduces a really important thing too. We'll get into a little bit later is as you assemble your team, finding people who you feel like you can communicate with clearly. So that's great that you give your cell phone out. Not all attorneys do it. And so if that's something that you're looking for in your representation, be sure to ask for that when you're interviewing real estate attorneys. You're part of the seminar, we imagine, because you're interested in selling now. And it's a really interesting time to be selling. So we always start with that question of why sell now? It's not, as you may have heard, there's interest rates are incredibly high right now, and it can be hard to find buyers who are qualified to purchase particularly higher priced properties. But there's a lot of good reasons to put your property on the market at the moment. So if you need to sell, if you need to move, if you need to trade up to a larger space, or alternately, if you are downsizing, if your property is a high demand category, so you've got outdoor space, you have parking, you have a townhouse anywhere in Brooklyn or Manhattan, or sadly for us, if you're ready to move out of New York City, we know people are ready to move out. Now is a really good time to be selling. And one of the things that we are also seeing is, regardless of those high interest rates and the borrowing costs for buyers and just the high transaction costs for buyers, that there is not an enormous amount of inventory available, and that low inventory is keeping prices high, even as homes become less and less affordable for buyers. So not a bad time to be putting on the market. And now it is summer, so we are past the spring selling season. And we do these seminars every month because every month is a different market. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Coming on in the summer is a sort of compressed version of that low inventory. And a lot of inventory has been cleared. A lot of things that have come on the market in the spring are now in contract. So coming on in the summer, you may have fewer eyeballs on your property, but the buyers who are out there have less to choose from. Summer can be a really good time to sell. There's always a good time to sell. We're going to get into things to consider when you are thinking about selling. So this market has been in a constant state of flux over the past few years. So as you all saw with the pandemic, there was a lot of sort of panic, people fleeing New York. Then we have people coming back into New York. And those people who are coming back to New York are being greeted with this low inventory environment. As we mentioned, interest rates being high, but also rents have really soared. So during the pandemic, there were a lot of people were able to buy into these great rents, right? They were able to get this incredibly good deals because landlords wanted to keep people in the city. Those days are over and rents are going up. We're no longer seeing the kinds of concessions that landlords were offering during the pandemic. And so people are seeing, oh, you know what? It's really expensive to borrow money to buy right now, but it's also expensive to rent. And if I'm going to go, now might be a good time to buy. So if you do have a property that is priced correctly and positioned well, it is a good time to sell. And I would argue it's as good a time to be on the market as it was when interest rates were low and there was a lot of transactions happening. Your sellers are finding their buyers. Another big consideration is, have you owned your property long enough? And so I'm going to hand this back over to Jackie in a second, because as I mentioned, in terms of those high transaction costs, so if you bought a while ago, you may forget how expensive it is to sell and or to close on property in New York. So we like to look at, have you owned your property long enough that you are actually going to be able to see a profit on your sale? So Jackie, what are some of the closing costs that a seller needs to take into consideration when they're factoring what their potential profit could be?
Straight across, whether it's a house, a condo, or a co-op, there is a New York City, New York State transfer tax that gets charged to the seller. The only time as a seller when you don't pay that is if it's new development. So you also pay that as a buyer, but it's 1.825% of the sale price. And that there's a portion that goes to New York City and a portion that goes to New York State. Even with a co-op, I know it's not considered real property, but you still pay that transfer tax. Your mortgage that you're paying off, obviously, the realtor commissions. And if you are selling property in New York, but you're not a New York resident, or it was not your, excuse me, your primary for 2 of the last 5 years, there's also this New York State withholding tax that gets paid at closing. It's part of the capital gains, but it does get paid at closing. Another consideration is if you're selling a co-op, and recently more condos do this as well, there's a flip tax, which could be a percentage of your sale price. It could be based on any profit. Every building is different, but I think it's safe to say a lot of co-ops have just a flat 1% flip tax. Everyone's a little different. And then just some miscellaneous recording fees from the title company to record documents. That those don't really add up, but you could say another $1,000 or so in that. And then your attorney fee. Considerations are the transfer taxes, a flip tax, and the broker commissions.
Yes, my cat might co-star in this just for a second. I cannot keep him away from me right now. Just apologies in advance. But yes, and let's talk for a second about broker fees. One of the things that has changed recently in the industry, if you've been following it all, is that there is currently a kind of a decoupling of the fees that are paid by the seller. So sellers have historically paid both the sell side, the people who represent you, and the buy side agents out of the proceeds from the sale. And there has been a class action suit that we're waiting to see whether or not the Department of Justice will accept the settlement terms, but that is breaking that out so that we as brokers are no longer able to share our commissions with the buy side agents. So if I sell your home, I can't share my commission with the person representing the buyer. And you as the seller are now, if you want to pay a buyer's agent, that's something that you need to disclose in advance, and it would be in our listing agreement that we would have. This is something we can obviously talk through at length, and it'll be really interesting to see how it breaks out. New York City is a town in which people do like to have, they like to pay professionals to help them and provide services to them. So this is it's a town where people really don't have the time to represent themselves as buyers. And while we're in this moment, I think it's really important for my sellers, and something that we talk through when we're having our initial conversations, to understand that a buyer's representative, somebody representing that buyer, may bring as much value to the deal as I, your listing agent, bring to the deal. If they're working with, especially this is for expensive, very particular homes, somebody who's been working with a buyer for years and is bringing that buyer knowledge and skill and is negotiating on behalf of that person, that buyer's agent is somebody who is bringing value to you as a seller. And I don't think it's immoral for that person to be compensated with a kind of a finder's fee from you, the seller. But this is something that we're going to see play out through the courts, and it may change as we go. And every single listing I've had in 2024, every listing I've taken, we've been in a slightly different environment as far as that's concerned. So this is something just to be aware of and keep your eyes on. But I do just want to have a moment of saying, I also represent buyers, and that buyers brokers really do bring value to a transaction. And until we figure out legally how they're compensated, it's something that I think is important for you to factor into your closing costs for now. All right, that's my whole sidebar on that. And then your other considerations are not just what are the costs associated with it, but is your property what people are looking for? So do you have the kinds of amenities that buyers are seeking? One of the things we're finding in the past couple of years is a lot of millennial buyers. So buyers who are first-time buyers, but who have an enormous amount of wealth that they've accumulated. They've been renting for their adult lives, and now they are first-time buyers, but they're buying rather expensive properties. And so they need a lot of guidance as they go through things. And they're also they're not experienced homeowners. They've always had landlords. And so they are more inclined to purchase turnkey properties. They're anxious about something that needs work. Have heard a lot of horror stories about how expensive it is to hire contractors, or how long it takes the DOB to approve changes, or your co-op board to approve any kind of an alteration. And so turnkey properties are really the things that are moving most quickly in the market right now. People do not really want to do the work. That said, there are people who are fixer-upper buyers who really want to customize a home for their needs. If you have one of those, we just need to price it accordingly, and we'll find those buyers for you. There really is a buyer for just about every property out there, and it really is just about positioning your marketing to attract that buyer, get them to your home, and then hang on to them through the process of closing. You only need one buyer. So if you have a home that doesn't appeal to everybody, that's fine. We just are looking for the one person. And when we find that person, we really want to hang on to them for you. So different things that people look for, they will look for. Outdoor space is always something people like. You'll find people who are buying in particular school districts, which isn't something that we can advise about, but it does happen. More and more people are looking for only single family homes, not multifamilies. There's been a lot of changes in multifamily home ownership and the guidelines that landlords must follow. And particularly for first-time home buyers, their attorneys, I'll let you get into that a little bit, Jackie, are advising that they don't become multifamily landlords who have to file a lot of paperwork. And then that's so funny. Our last bullet point is parking. If you've got parking, I can sell your house. If you've got parking, you can sell your house. But parking is always a good amenity. But Jackie, would you mind talking just for a minute about changes that have happened for multifamily dwellings?
So
Unless you don't want to get into it, but
I'm sorry.
unless you don't want to get into it, but
No, it's not that I'm not familiar or up to date with all of the new landlord tenant laws. All I can tell you is that becoming a landlord is very difficult. The tenants are very well protected. There's a lot of paperwork for multifamily. I always think that the best compromise is a two-family house, right? You can buy it, you've got that stream of income coming in. You don't have to file the paperwork. You're a landlord, but it's usually one family and it's easy. It helps pay for the mortgage. And it's just the multifamily with all of the new, there's the cat, the regulations and the paperwork. And then if you don't do it, there's violations and fines and the correct type of lighting. It's just a headache unless you're very well versed in that area. I would say that the closing costs are higher as well. So unless that's your niche, I'd say the one or two family homes is the best choice for a buyer and for sellers to sell. I think it's the easiest to sell right now. Mortgages are easier. There's a lot of variables.
there are a lot of variables. And one of the things that we're finding is that people who if you own a property that's a multifamily that has any kind of rent regulation, if you have rent stabilized or rent controlled tenants, those are things where you're looking for a very specialized purchaser. And we know how to find those, like they're out there. But we are seeing large discounts on those properties on a price per square foot basis over two-family homes or single-family homes. So it's just something to be aware of. There are buyers, they're out there, but it's unfortunately, those homes are not as valuable relative to other property types at the moment. So let's say we haven't talked you out of selling right now. One of the things we actually start at the end at Realty Collective. We start at where you want to end up. So we are at point A. And if we say point B is where you are after you've completed this sale and you have moved into your new home, what does plan B look like for you? What is your plan for after you sell? So are you going to stay in the city? Are you going to downsize into something else? Are you planning to rent? Are you moving altogether? What's your timeline for that? And what's your bottom line in terms of how much money you need to get out of the home in order for it to be worthwhile for you to sell? So these are things that we really want to talk through at the very beginning. We do not want to be having these conversations the week before you close. So, and finding out what your plan is after, because it may turn out that this year isn't the best time for you to sell. If your plan B is that you doesn't really accommodate the kind of timeline that it takes for a sale, if you need to move more quickly, then maybe it makes more sense for you to rent your home now and then give yourself a little bit of time before you put it on the market. So these are things we definitely want to know because we don't want you to experience any unpleasant surprises as we get close to closing. You haven't found a new home you want to move into, and now we have to go back to the attorneys and ask for more time. So, Jackie, is that something that you experience?
Yeah, I think that's like a very good point is there needs to be a plan because there are buyers out there who will, if you need to sell, but you need 4 months, or you can close in 2 months, but need 2 additional months to move into your new property. As long as we have that information in the beginning, we can negotiate that into the terms. So we can do a post possession. This way you sell, you pay off all of your debt, you pay a per diem based on the number of days, and then you've got that money and the liquidity to buy something else. Buyers, it depends on timing. Rates are some buyers have a specific timeline. I need to be in by end of August for school. But your buyer who doesn't, the only real concern is locking a rate. So a buyer most likely can lock a rate for 60 to 90 days. So they might say, okay, it's okay if you stay in the house for longer, but we need to close by this date. And then as I was saying earlier, we could do a post possession. For a plan, it's also important to maybe run a quick title search before you go into even full live listing, just to make sure. You might think the only debt is your mortgage, but there could be judgments or even violations from DOB. So you want to make sure that you've got the time to be able to clear everything between contract signing and closing. I can't tell you the number of people that are that I'm representing as sellers, and there's open permits on their house that they had no idea about. And then we've got to get an expediter, and things get done, but it takes time, and DOB is very behind. So I think to have a good idea of what's going on with your house in terms of your timing, and to get a head start on addressing any issues. I had a survey done also, and and only because it happens far more than not in Brooklyn and the city, that there could be an out of possession on the property. And then you have to go to your neighbor, and it takes time to negotiate them signing some sort of affidavit, because then the neighbor thinks you're taking some of their, like, it's all just knowing what's going on with the house and your timing, and just having a good team who can walk you through and really manage expectations for how long it will take to take care of certain items. But I do think timing it is very important. When can you be out is really, then we can work backwards from there with everything else.
Exactly. I think there is no one way to do this. You don't just get on a conveyor belt and pop out at the other end of it. And so knowing what your needs are, and the more clear you can be with us about that, even if it feels idiosyncratic to you, we can work that into whatever deal if we know in advance and we are not accidentally negotiating something that you won't be able to accommodate. So it is true. I actually am doing something right now where we're selling a house that had an open permit that nobody knew about. The owner owns a house on the same block where he put solar on one roof, and they got a quote for solar on both buildings, but he only did it on one. Meanwhile, the solar company pulled a permit for this house. And so it's the solar company will clear it themselves. And if they don't, I mean, it's not a big deal as permits are concerned, but it is really important to do that in advance. And then also just be clear about it so that we know if we can't get it cleared by the time we put the property on the market, that your attorney knows that's something that will be cleared before closing. So you've decided to sell. and you've answered these questions, you've got a strategy, and it's time to assemble your team. So we are going to give you a couple of links on how to interview a real estate agent from a seller's viewpoint and what to ask a real estate attorney from a seller's viewpoint. But I think this is a really personal choice. So in my experience, I work with, our company is quite small. It's a small woman-owned company. We do not have shareholders. We work for our clients. Our clients are our customers, not our shareholders. And so we are able to put enormous focus on the work that we do. We don't do massive volume business. And I work very closely hands-on one with my sellers. I don't have a big team. I don't outsource a lot of things to people. That said, we have a really robust back end. So we have a really good support administrative staff to support our sellers. But I'm the person who my sellers are dealing. I've got the cell phone that the people are calling. And so for people who want that kind of personal experience, I'm a great agent for them. If you're somebody who wants a big corporate brokerage and you want a very broad base of a massive team representing you, you might be looking for something else in an agent. But really make sure you find somebody who works for you and works for your property. So you want to make sure that they're an expert, either an expert in your property type, an expert in your neighborhood, possibly an expert in your type of sale. If you're, say, you live overseas and you're selling a home to potentially an investor, you maybe want somebody who's had that kind of a transaction experience previously, but they should know how to navigate the market as it is right now. So this market just keeps shifting and shifting. You definitely want somebody who understands what's happening on the ground in your neighborhood and with your property type. You also want someone who understands you and how you want to communicate. So we have a lot of different ways that we can communicate with ourselves. So some people want to just do everything over email. Some people like to talk on the phone. We've got people who love to text. Make sure you have somebody whose communication style jives with yours, and also somebody who understands you. And this is a little bit easier said than done, but find somebody who when you say something to them, they don't ask you to repeat it or explain it all the time. Like if you have somebody who you feel like is willfully misunderstanding you, maybe it's time for you to move on to another agent. And that stuff is very personal. Also, it's always great to get recommendations from people who've either, if you're in a big building, somebody who's sold in your building recently and the experience they've had with that agent, or your friends who have recently sold. Getting that kind of personal recommendation can be really useful as well. What would you say are things to look for in a real estate attorney, Jackie?
I think the biggest, and I say this to clients who call me to either interview me or just to have a casual conversation, is make sure that the attorney is just a real estate attorney. That's number one. And the reason I say that is because if they're in court or they're in depositions all the time, or they know a little bit of real estate and a little bit of something else, you're not going to get all their attention, right? Because it's such a fast moving transaction up until contract signing. Then it's like a wait game, but you need somebody who's really always around, because it's cutthroat. And if somebody isn't responding or sending out comments right away or sending out the contract right away, buyers and sellers are moving on to the next offer. Aside from that, I do think an important question to ask is, will I be working with you or somebody on your team? And with myself, I handle all of my own files. I've got two paralegals, but they handle some of the innocuous correspondence. I do everything. I go to all of my closings. You want to make sure that the attorney who takes the initial intake call is the person that you're working with, because it could be a great conversation initially, and then you never hear from that person again. So what I'd say also is fees. Most attorneys who do a ton of transactional work have approximately the same fee, give or take a couple $100. If you find an attorney who's willing to do it for $1,000 or $1,500 less than others, I'm telling you, you're either going to fire them and find somebody else, or you're never going to speak to them and you're going to talk to their paralegal. So I think that it's important not to just see whoever is the least expensive, but to make sure they've got experience. And you can ask for referrals, or even referrals from brokers or a mortgage broker who's worked with them. But I would say somebody who focuses just on New York real estate is important, and to make sure you're working with that person. And just also see if they've got some support staff too, because if you need to close on a date, even with myself, I think I've missed 5 closings in 20 years, but if somebody has to close on a specific date, I do have another attorney who can cover for me. So I think it's a good teamwork, and also being able to communicate. I think you touched on it earlier, is what's the best form of communication? Everybody is different. Some people love to text, some people love, just when you're speaking to your attorney, make sure you guys are on the same page with the communication. I'm better on the phone. I feel like conversations or emails, texts, I think, are too choppy. I will text, but I just think a conversation is always goes a long way, because most questions lead to 10 others, and to at least set aside some time. But I think just make sure the person is very well versed in New York, and especially if you're selling a co-op, right? It's completely different than a condo and a house, and there's a lot of moving parts. So just to really interview them to make sure they've got experience in whatever type of property you're selling.
I think that's such good advice. And also, you were just talking about what the transaction fee is. And this, I would love to clear this up, because if you've never sold a home before, you don't necessarily know how this works. But there are sometimes attorneys who will charge like a retainer and then an hourly fee, because their practice encompasses a lot of things that aren't real estate. So if you want to understand from the beginning roughly what your costs are going to be, that's something that you can ask your attorney in the beginning.
Yeah, and most attorneys for real estate are flat transactional, with a couple of, if there's a power of attorney, maybe there's a little extra, but they should tell you up front. So it shouldn't be as though you think your bill is going to be 3,500 and you get to the closing table and it's 7,000. They should be very transparent. Hourly gets a little funny, because then you don't want to call your attorney because you're being billed for every time you pick up the phone. But most of us who see a lot of the same cast of characters, it's a transactional thing. And I think that just makes everybody most comfortable.
I think so too. It always makes me nervous when there's somebody who's paying hourly, and then I feel like if I'm going to talk to the attorney, then it's going to cost my client money. This makes me feel anxious. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear you say that.
Yeah.
And I think other issues like this kind of communication with your agent is also really important from the beginning, of who's going to be showing my home at the open house. How many open houses are you going to be doing? Will you be advertising my property? Where will you be advertising it? Where do you think all of that, I think, will be in our list of things to ask. But your seller or your selling agent should have a marketing plan for your home. And I've seen pitch packets from agents from big firms who are like, here's all the money we've made, and here's all the transactions that we've done. And it's a 40-page document, and it doesn't say anything about the property that you're asking them to sell for you. And I think that it doesn't matter if somebody's like a number one agent someplace. You need to know what they're going to do for you and for what their plan is for your home, because you need to feel like you're not just, part of a 40-page pamphlet for somebody, that your home is going to be the most important thing that person is doing this month. So, or maybe you don't, maybe you just want to be part of a 40-page pamphlet, in which case you'll find those people, they're out there. Let's talk about that. You've found your team, and it's really important, as we said, to get this done beforehand. Your team has had a chance to review the public records regarding your building. And we have also talked through any issues that that your building has that might come up in an inspection, or might come up just when we're showing. So some of those things, if we can address them beforehand, is really helpful to do. So if there are little cosmetic changes that we can make, if there's a broken faucet or a light switch that doesn't work, let's get that done before we put it on the market. If it's something that you can't afford, or we can't afford to fix for you, then it's something that we're going to be able to work into our pricing and our marketing strategy. So if you have a broken dishwasher in your rental unit and you just don't want to get it fixed before closing or before it's in contract, let me know, and I will know that in advance of an inspection. So we've gone through all that. We've gone through warts and all, what's wrong with the house, what's great about the house. And now we're going to work on your marketing strategy. So what story are you telling is what we want to say to our sellers all the time. So if you have a house that's a real fixer-upper, like it's got real problems, that's a story we can tell. It's actually it's a marketable quantity. A house that needs work is a house that we can sell. We just need to sell it as a house that needs work. So we want to be able to tell a consistent story. You don't want to use virtual renovation or virtual staging to show people what you think it could look like if they put $1 million into it. We want to sell the house as it is. So what is that story? What's the story of your house? And can your broker tell that story in a convincing way that solicits buyers for you. So as far as staging is concerned, like we really love to stage. We have our own staging company within our real estate firm. We stage our homes for free for our buyers as part of the commission. And we do that because it makes it easier for us to do our jobs of selling your home. And as we do that, we want this staging to reflect your home. So we don't have just like a bunch of stuff from West Elm that we stick in a house and we say, here, there you go. We want the staging to tell the story of the home as well. We want a home to look like it's lived in, believe it or not, with the exception of new construction. Homes that feel lived in are going to sell for higher prices than homes that look like a furniture showroom. A little bit of character goes a long way. If it's a home that you currently live in and you have, let's say, more things in it than you need to, sometimes we will work on decluttering, but just beginning your move, basically. We can move some of your furniture, some of your possessions out so that we're clearing away the things that don't tell the story of your home as clearly and coherently as we would like to. And as I mentioned, like we do not do virtual staging. We just don't. You don't want to put photos onto the internet that don't match the home that the people will see when they show up to see it for the first time. It seems really basic, but people will look at that listing over and over again. They'll send it to their friends before they set foot in the house. And if the pictures don't look like the apartment, don't look like the house, you're going to have a hard time selling it. So we try to avoid virtual staging. We try to avoid virtual renovations, and we focus on selling the home as it is in the best possible light we can show in it. I don't know what's next. Sorry. Oh, we're going to send you a post about virtual staging. I'm really like, I'm very, a little bit anti-virtual staging. So let's say we've done a great job marketing it. We're telling the story of the home. People show up, they love it. It looks like the pictures. It looks even better than the pictures. And you're going to get some offers. If we've priced it, you're going to get offers that are above the asking price, at the asking price, and below the asking price. That's how we like to bracket it. Sometimes you can underprice a home so that every offer is coming in above the asking price. I don't usually like that process. I think it leads to some bad results. People can feel that they're overpaying for the home and it can lead to balky buyers. So we try to price accurately to the extent that we possibly can. That said, what you'll get in New York City is strong offers right off the bat. And it can feel for you as a seller, oh, somebody's offering me the asking price. Maybe we underpriced it. And that is not the case. So if somebody's offering you the asking price, we've priced it accurately. Chances are we will get offers that are a little over the asking price, or even that person who's starting at the asking price might come up a little bit. But don't let asking price offers make you feel like you've mispriced the home. So always take the first offer seriously. So if you're getting somebody who's seen everything, has been outbid on everything, their first offer might be the strongest offer you get. Sometimes you're like, oh, that's great. Let's see what happens next week. By next week, something else is going to be on the market and you could lose that buyer. Take those first offers seriously. And if something comes in low, you can counter everything. There are buyers out there who just want to see that what's the lowest price I can get it for. That's the game for them. And they may be willing to pay more than anybody else, but they need to start at a lower number. So try not to be insulted by low offers and try not to be spooked by high offers. Like these are things that are all very normal. And there he is again. There's the cat. So and also take that first round of buyers very seriously, because those are the ones who understand the market best and who are most motivated to purchase. And if we miss them in the first couple of weeks, it can take 6 weeks for the buyer pool to refresh, at which point your property has been knocked down a few pages on the search results. And time on market is a real deal killer. And we want to try to take people seriously at the beginning. Don't just wait for the rest of them to keep rolling in. You really want to try to get that offer in as good shape as you possibly can. As I mentioned, the biggest deal killer is time. So we've got multiple offers in. How are you going to consider them and how are you going to weigh them against each other? As we pointed out from the beginning, we are focused on getting you to point B. So your exit strategy is going to determine what's the best offer for you. So somebody can come in with the highest number, but if they need to move in next week, and you need an extra couple of months because you're closing on a home that you found to purchase, that higher price offer might not be the right one for you. That said, if you can pack up all your stuff and be out of there, maybe it does make sense for you. You're going to go into a rental. It's going to be uncomfortable. But these are all the things that we like to take into consideration when we look at each offer compared to the other. So it's not just about price, it is also about deal terms. And deal terms that you're also going to be looking at include various contingencies that your attorney that we need to get cleared up from agent to agent before we hand it over to those to your attorneys. And we want to have that all very clear before we send out a deal sheet. So we've sat down, we've talked through all of the different offers. We've decided this one that isn't exactly the highest price, but has the best deal terms and the fewest contingencies is the one that works best for you and your exit strategy. And so we have negotiated all of those terms and memorialized those in a deal sheet, which we then send over to the attorneys. And so it goes over to Jackie and the buy-side attorney as well. So Jackie, what happens then?
So once the deal sheet goes out to the attorneys, then is when the real work starts. The seller's attorney in New York drafts a proposed contract. So when I'm representing a seller, I would draft the contract. I send it over to the buyer's attorney right away without the seller reviewing it, with language specifically says, my seller has not reviewed this. And then when I get comments back from the buyer's attorney, I set up a call, or there are some people who do want to come and meet in person, whatever anybody prefers, and we go over the contract with all the comments from the buyer's attorney. However, before I do send out the contract, I do an intake call with the client. So I'll get a copy of the stock and lease if they have it. If somebody is on title and they've passed away, I need some of those, the death certificate, certain documents. I just want to make sure that the initial draft of the contract, there's a lot of attorneys who don't ask any questions and they just, an hour after getting the deal sheet, shoot out a contract just to say it's there. I do get it out the same day because I do know that's important, but I like to have as many details in there as I can. You have a copy of your title insurance policy or the stock certificate, or that there's violations, and we're going to carve those out. So I send the contract out again, and then it's up to the buyer's attorney to get comments back. Every type of property is a little different. If it's a house, we should have comments back in a day or two. If it's a co-op or a condo, some attorneys are waiting for some of the due diligence materials to come in. And then the problem that I'm sure, Tina, you and all of your agents are the most frustrated about are management companies. Because
yes, preach.
and I can tell you the number of phone calls today just on that is the buyer's attorney, or they're at the mercy of the management companies to get them documents. They send a questionnaire, they have questions, they want to review minutes. And especially in the summer, I don't know what happens, but everybody just like disappears and nobody will cover somebody else's building. So I like to say they should be able to get their due diligence back in 5 days. I'm seeing like 10 days lately, and that's even pushing. But as a seller's attorney, so as much information as a buyer has, the better. If you have a copy of all the financials, or you've got the updated house rules, send us more is better, so we can at least send it over to the buyer's attorney and they can get started. Self-managed buildings, sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but unfortunately with this area we're at the mercy of management a lot. But there's constant updates though to clients. So what are we waiting on? What are we not waiting on? I think the most important thing as a seller is if there's an issue about, let me know so I can put that into the contract, or at least work on dealing with it. And side note, if you're selling something and somebody on title has passed away, the realtors really need to know about that, because if there's a will that has to go through probate, that could blow up the deal because it could take 6 months. So just as much information as you have is better to begin with.
Yeah, totally agree about that. And it is true about the management companies. They're slower than I've ever seen them. And they are not apologetic about it.
No, they don't care.
If you're selling in a
Friday, see you later, we're out at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's pros and cons to that. If you're selling a co-op or a condo, a lot of that documentation is now online. And so that's made it much easier for us as agents to access the information. But it is also like they go to the website and oftentimes the information that the buy side needs is not actually
Yeah.
on the website. And so they'll send their questionnaire and then we're waiting. And they say, oh, the turnaround time is 5 business days. And it says it there in writing. And we are definitely seeing 10 business days on the things that
Yeah.
turn around in
Yeah.
5. And then part of our job is to make sure that everybody stays calm and focused on getting this deal signed, because you're not going to have a signed contract until the buyer's agent or the buyer's attorney has reviewed that documentation. And until you have a signed contract, the buyer can just walk away.
Right.
And so there's nothing legally binding about an accepted offer in New York City. And so that buyer, something else comes on the market that they like better, they can actually just jump to that with no consequences. And so that's also one of the reasons why we want to be careful in our marketing to make sure that we're continuing to show after you have an accepted offer. We can tell people we're just showing for backup, but we have to keep showing. And every offer that we get, we will present to you. Every offer that we receive in writing, we will send to the seller. And so the same rule goes for you. If you are not legally bound to those buyers, you could jump to another offer if it is significantly better for you than the offer that you currently have on the table. Generally speaking, we would also offer the buyer an opportunity to meet the new offer terms if they chose that they wanted to come up in price, or if they wanted to eliminate a contingency. So just from an ethical standpoint, I think it's always helpful to give buyers a chance to meet a better offer. But there's nothing legally stopping you from just hopping to a different deal. But that is rare. I will say it is not the case. And normally, as long as every cooler heads can prevail, we can keep the deal on the rails until we get to a signed contract. Another piece that will happen during this time period is an inspection. I would say that most deals used to be that people were doing co-op deals. They wouldn't do an inspection. Most of my deals now do involve an inspection.
Yeah.
And I think they're great. They're really useful for everybody, and there's nothing to be afraid of, especially if we've already gone through the house. We have an idea of what is going to come up during an inspection. We've disclosed the things in advance that we think they might try to use as a bargaining chip. It's harder for them to bargain if we've already disclosed it. And then if there is something that comes up that we were not aware of, then we can address that in the contract with the attorneys in a number of different ways. Jackie, what are some of the ways if something came up in the inspection? This just happened to me where there was a plumbing issue, nothing catastrophic, but we got a plumber in who estimated that the cost to repair it would be $5,000. What are some of the ways that might be addressed in a contract?
So it's really two ways. I would say, as a seller, the cleanest way is just give your buyer a credit, right? I mean, you have two choices, or I guess three technically. You can say no and see what the buyer says. But if something comes up, you either will incorporate into the rider that you'll make the repair prior to closing. So it doesn't need to be done prior to contract signing, but prior to closing, the repair will be made, and the buyer will come and do a final walkthrough and check. Or we can get estimates from a couple different vendors, and if they're all in the same ballpark, offer a credit. A lot of times when people are selling, they're done with their house, their unit. They don't want to do any work. They didn't do the work while they lived there, so they certainly don't want to do it for somebody else. And a lot of sellers will opt to give a credit, which I think works best for most, only because a buyer, if you fix something as a seller and they try to claim you didn't fix it the right way, they're not happy with it, a credit is much cleaner. It might cost you a tiny bit more as a seller because then maybe if you had a friend or somebody who could really fix it a certain way, but it's cleaner, nobody can complain, and you don't have to do any work to the unit.
I agree. I think that's usually the easiest way. And a lot of times when you're selling, you don't actually have the money to put into a repair.
Right.
You prepared it yourself if you had the money. Sometimes there are things that we as agents can that we can front the costs for certain things and then be compensated for them at closing to make those things easier. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Again, transparency and real communication and speed is really clear here. So if there's somebody who's like, I can get my plumber in next week to get an estimate, and then we'll put that into the contract, I'd rather overestimate what the cost
Right.
is going to be and get it into the contract this week, because I don't know what better priced comparable home is coming on the market this weekend that
Mhm.
decide they want to see that doesn't have a plumbing problem or something like that. It is time. I just want to say it again and again. I have friends, not clients, but friends who were working with a family attorney who had been working with their family for decades, who failed to get a contract out in time when they were selling. And he said, "Oh, I'll get it to them on Monday." Their buyers went and saw something over the weekend and they moved
Yeah.
ahead with the other purchase. So time can really throw a wrench in the works for you. And so that's one of the reasons it might seem like we're really pressuring you to get these things, to get this into contract, but it's in fact because we want to protect you, not because we want to exploit you. All right, so we've got the contract signed. We got through all over those hurdles. And now you're in contract, and now we're going to get moving on towards closing the deal. So it may feel like you're ready to relax. Okay, we're in contract, but there is actually a fair amount of work left for you to do during that period of time. So one thing is that you will have to move out of the house. I don't know why this needs to be said, but it should be said. Unless you have a post-possession agreement that Jackie was talking about earlier, where you are going to be permitted to remain in the home after closing, you are going to have to move out, and you are going to have to address anything that came up in the inspection that you have agreed to and had included in the contract. So those are all things you don't want to wait to the last minute to get those things done. You definitely want to check all of your mechanicals are still working. You want to make sure after you move out that the mechanicals, that the outlet that you couldn't see because it was behind your grandmother's sideboard, make sure those things are working, because you will have to do a final walkthrough prior to the closing, and all those things are going to need to be working. Can you tell us more about that, Jackie?
What I will say is when you're moving out, whether it is the day before closing or a month before closing, do not turn off the utilities. Do not turn off the utility. I don't know why lately everyone is turning off the utilities. You need the utilities on because your buyer, as he was saying, needs to do a final walkthrough. If the utilities aren't on, electric, not a big deal. They can usually turn it on within a couple of hours. If your gas is turned off, it could take 2 weeks to get the gas back on because the gas companies are afraid of gas leaks. And you have a closing date. If the buyer can't test, even if it's just the stove top, if that's the only thing that's gas, they're either going to adjourn the closing or they're going to ask you to hold back a decent amount of money in escrow so that when the gas is turned on, they can make sure that the appliances work. So it's really keep that on when you move out, make sure any damage, you have to spackle any holes. You don't have to repaint or re-wallpaper, but just make sure any holes. You've got to leave the premises vacant and broom clean. You don't need a professional cleaner, but it can't hurt. It just as a courtesy to just have your home. I mean, it's your home to make somebody excited about it. And really just timing. Again, if you don't want to come to the closing, you can give your attorney power of attorney. They can sign for you, wire the money to you. Lately, I think ever since COVID, sellers don't even come to closings anymore. And it's fine. If you want to come, great. If not, my office can sign as power of attorney. And just to make sure that, as Tina said, everything's in working order. Because the worst is when you have a final walkthrough and all of a sudden it's being discovered that something doesn't work. And then you're stuck as a seller, again, giving a much larger credit than it would have been for you to repair it yourself. So I would say maybe have you and your broker, Tina, go by, do a preliminary walkthrough a week or so before to be able to address any issues.
Yeah, I think that's really, and also sometimes there's something that like doesn't seem to be working, but is working. I just had this recently with a dishwasher that I wasn't
a little finicky.
it's a little bit like you have to make sure it's closed all the way and then it works. And I had to go back, make sure that, and then shoot video of the functioning dishwasher and then text it to people at the closing so that they were able to actually close on that. So it's something obviously we're happy to do, but if we can avoid it, or if we know in advance what to be on the lookout for.
I would say you brought up something that the outlets, those are always like, it's always what we're fighting about. And it seems ridiculous if you have a house that has 25 outlets and what is it working? You do have some buyers who are going to make a big deal about it because the contract does say just to be proactive and test everything. And if you're selling a house, you want to order a final water reading. Every type of property is different. So I would go through, even in the beginning stages, what's your checklist for when you're getting ready to close?
And every resale in New York is an as is sale. And so sometimes people are like, blah, it's as is. I don't have to do anything. There are certain things that you do need to have
Yeah,
mechanically functioning, particularly if somebody's buying something with financing that would hold up your closing. And we don't want anything to happen in that way.
right.
So that's it. We've gone through, we've made it through your final walkthrough. There was nothing that needed to be addressed. Oh, look, and my cat showed up for a final cameo. Nothing that needed to be addressed at the closing table, which I think is great for attorneys and great for you as a seller. And then all that's left is to finish that paperwork, sign everything, and hand over the
Get
key.
your money.
Get your money, get your check. Oh, and one thing that I do want to mention is that sometimes people, especially if you've owned a home for a long time, you may be concerned about capital gains. So we talked about closing costs that you do pay at the closing table, but we didn't talk about capital gains at all. And we have just a couple minutes left. Would you mind? So Jackie, for example, are capital gains due at closing?
No, capital gains is due the next year for your taxes. You'll want to speak to your accountant to see if you're selling property and it's just you're selling a single one person, there's an exemption of 250,000. If you're a married couple selling, the exemption is 500,000. Keep in mind though, it has to be your primary residence that you're selling. Off topic, and we can get it into another time, but if you are selling and it's not your primary and you don't want to pay capital gains, you can do what's called a 1031 exchange. That would mean though you're taking the profit and dumping it into another investment property. It all depends, but their capital gains would be due with your next tax period.
And really essential, this is when we're talking about the the getting from point A to point B, is that if a 1031 tax exchange is in your future, or if capital gains are a real concern, that's something that we need to know from the beginning.
Right.
Because it is, you don't want to be deciding to do a 1031 exchange at the closing table. At that point, it is probably too late.
There's
So
also specific language we add to the contract because there's a document that your buyer needs to sign. It just says that they're a bona fide purchaser, but again, you just want to make sure that they're aware and that they'll agree to sign that piece of paper at the closing table.
and this is something that I think your team, when we talk about assembling your team, yes, your team is your agent and your attorney, but there are other sort of members of that team as well. And your financial advisor, your accountant,
Yes.
somebody who's, you can even have somebody who comes on as a 1031 specialist who helps you with that, although your attorney and your agent should be able to handle it for you. Those are all people who we can be in communication with as we go through this process to make sure that all of your advisors are working in the same direction. And I talk to a lot of people who are financial planners who work with multiple generations in families. And these can be long conversations. They're often suspicious of my motives as an agent. I'm happy to talk them through. And a lot of people we're also willing to go through this process with you. And if the conclusion is it's not a great time to sell, we are frequently advising people not to sell. If you can hold on to your real estate in New York, that usually is a smart thing to do. We're also not here to talk you into this process. We're just here to help you through it if it's the right thing for you to do. So I think that's about it from us. We're going to be sharing with some more tips and in the email as we follow up. And we're happy to schedule a call to talk with you. I don't think, did any questions come up in the chat? I don't think any questions did, but we do have a little more time if anybody has any questions that they want to unmute and ask us while we're here. Obviously, people don't necessarily want to discuss their business in this kind of a format, but happy to chat while you have us here, or you can talk with us privately if you prefer. All right. It looks like it's going to be private chats, but thank you so much for joining us. Jackie, so much for doing, this is my first time doing Selling in Brooklyn with Jackie, so I'm really happy to.
Yeah, no, great. Anytime you need me, I'm around.
Excellent. I'm really happy to hear that you give people your mobile number, because not all attorneys do. And I think that I certainly find myself in positions where I'm like, what is the attorney saying? And knowing people can be in direct touch with you is really helpful to me.
Okay, great. I look forward to hearing from anyone. Again, call me, email, and keep me posted on anything you need.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, everybody. Stay hydrated out there.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Bye.